Hey guys, it's me, Kelly. I have an extra special treat for you. I have live in the house, in studio, however you want to call it, I have my husband, Chuck. My husband, Chuck, is a pilot, and I have asked him to do a favor for me to come on here and talk to you guys about MH17 and what has happened with it from a pilot's perspective. We're not necessarily going to get into all the politics about it, but we are going to talk about the technicalities of the airplane, why what they're reporting on the news may or may not be true, and we'll see how all this pans out by the end of this broadcast. So I want to introduce all of you. You've never seen him before for the last 4 years. My husband, Chuck. So say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
It's just kind of weird having a guest like here. I'm used to them being like on the other side. So
I'm the shy one.
He's the shy one. He calls himself my chauffeur and my bodyguard because although he looks, really nice and sweet, he will kill anybody that tries to harm me. So, but first I want to give a shout out to my family who are watching live right now. I want to say hi to my mom and to my sisters Carol Kay and Becky, and to my great niece Rebecca. I want to say a big hello to you guys and thank you for being my family. Anyway, on this, what as far as being a pilot and knowing about airplanes, what is your experience? Can you explain that to everybody?
I worked in the aviation industry beginning about 1980. I'm an FAA certified aircraft technician, and I've exercised the privileges of that certificate for 34 odd years on and off. I became a licensed pilot in 1993. I've never flown for hire, but aviation is aviation, and aerodynamics is aerodynamics. Once you understand one, you understand that science from all the angle, no matter what you're doing in that field. I was also a Learjet systems trainer for a while. That's a corporate aircraft. It's a twin engine, basically a business jet. And most of my experience has been in light twin and single engine aircraft with some turbine engine experience, so I know a little bit about aerodynamics and aviation.
A little bit. He knows basically how to take an airplane, take it all into individual pieces, put it back together. So that's all he knows.
That's it.
That's it. I didn't just marry him for his good looks. He is crazy smart. Chuck is. When we met, he impressed me by flying me to a catfish place. Was that in Oklahoma?
Yes.
It impressed me, so we're married now. Anyway, so he's got some extensive experience. Now, he can't give you details about this, but what can you tell them about an investigation that you were involved in? So you know about the investigation process of...
Yes, I was in an integral part of an investigation back in the late 80s that involved the crash of a light twin that I was responsible for maintaining for a doctor here in Fort Worth. He sold the airplane.
Okay, you're just telling details. I didn't know you.
He sold the airplane to someone on the East Coast, and they crashed it, and that's how I became involved in the investigation. But
he did nothing wrong. Someone else did something wrong. So.
All right, I was just part of the information chain for the FAA.
So not only are you knowledgeable about the investigation process, but you've been a part of it at certain points, pieces and parts of it, in dealing with it. And we've got a cat behind us. I know. Who's she? Here's Tiffany. Everybody say hi, Tiffany. I know. She tries to steal the show in every one of these videos. So with this, is that all the experience you've had, pretty much, kind of in a nutshell?
In the aviation industry, yes.
Okay, he's extensive experience in a lot of other areas, but I think part that got me about this whole thing, and this is not anything that Chuck's going to talk about, and I am not a medical doctor. I just play one on the internet, but I'm just joking. But I am a country girl. I grew up in the country, and in the country, at least once a week, there is a dead cow on the side of the road. And you drive past that dead cow, day one, you see what it looks like, day two, day three, About day 4, day 5, that dead cow looks like a balloon with its legs sticking out. I'm sorry to be so gruesome about this.
We're talking about the airplane crash.
We're going to talk about the airplane crash, but I'm just talking about inconsistencies that I have seen, because the media has been showing pictures of dead bodies that look like they're about 4 or 5 days dead, that were supposed to be fresh bodies. So that immediately, for me, and we're not going to be talking about that, but immediately, some questions came up about the whole thing being on some level staged or faked. And Chuck, being a pilot and with the experience he has, we're going to see what his conclusion is about all this. But that's what started me questioning it. And then the little bit that I've learned from Chuck about, I'm not a pilot, obviously, but I hear a lot, and we have DFW. We're in the DFW airport. How many airports are there in the area? Guessing 2 international airports plus
a dozen.
Yeah, at least a dozen more. So we're very familiar with things flying in the sky. And I'm like, where is the debris? That pictures of debris or video of debris coming down from the sky. I really question. It's like, what is going on with this? But we're going to talk about all of that in detail. But we're going to show you a picture of the aircraft in question. And Chuck, we'll have you take control of the pointer in just a second. And here we go. I'm sorry, I apologize about Tiffany. Okay, I'll entertain the cat while you tell them about this aircraft.
This is a Boeing 777. This aircraft was, I guess, deposited out into the public market in the mid-90s, 95, 96. And it is one of the newer commercial airliners. This aircraft is probably capable of holding, depending on which version that you fly in, either 30 or 45,000 gallons of fuel. So it has a number of fuel tanks in the wings and in the fuselage. There are tanks, fuel tanks in the wings, and there are fuel tanks back up in the belly of the aircraft in the fuselage area. And this airplane looks to be an ER version, which is probably the larger capacity, and it probably holds about 45,000 gallons of fuel. That's a significant amount of fuel, and you might want to remember that when we start talking about how the aircraft comes apart later. This aircraft has a cruise speed of somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 knots, which is about 550 or 560 miles an hour. So when they're at cruise altitude and at cruise speed, they are flying pretty fast.
So let's click back off. Now you can see our pretty faces again.
Okay.
So that's the airplane. So now the first reports, what reports did you hear? How high up was the airplane? They're saying when it was hit with whatever.
I believe that I heard the aircraft was at somewhere in the neighborhood of 32,000 feet, which is an average cruise altitude for a long distance flight, which you might expect a 777 to fly at. The aircraft was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. And to get there, they had to fly over portions of Russia and the Ukraine, which is apparently where the aircraft came down. And the area where the aircraft came down is nowhere near either the point of takeoff, nor is it near the point of landing. So that said, this aircraft was most likely at cruise altitude, probably at the 32,000 feet that I heard. And it was most likely also at cruise speed, which is in the neighborhood of 550, 560 miles an hour, 900 knots. So any indication that this aircraft was shot down at a low level on takeoff or at landing or flying low to the ground, I tend to disbelieve that because of the flight path of the aircraft.
Now at 32,000 feet, Uh, is the cabin pressurized? Like, explain to us how that works. What does it mean to be pressurized? If you're shot down at 32,000 feet, what happens to an airplane if it's shot at that altitude?
Okay, aircraft that fly above 12 to 14,000 feet, which is almost virtually all commercial aircraft and all business aircraft, are pressurized because at the altitude that they fly at, you don't experience normal 14.7 psi pressure in the cabin of the aircraft. The pressure is reduced significantly for every 1,000 feet that you go up. So in order to maintain pressure inside the aircraft so the occupants can be comfortable without passing out, aircraft's pressurized.
So it's basically lighter air. The higher up you go, the air is lighter, less oxygen.
Air is less dense.
Less dense, yes. Okay.
And in order to overcome that density, that lower pressure, the air inside of the aircraft is pressurized, and it is the pressurization that you hear about whenever something happens to an aircraft and the fuselage is breached through some form of explosion or a projectile or whatever, and you experience what's called depressurization, which means the aircraft pressure inside goes immediately to whatever the pressure is at that altitude at that time.
That sounds like it would be very destructive.
It's terribly destructive. It's destructive to the aircraft itself, and in most cases, if you're at altitude, at a high altitude like that, the occupants of the airplane will pretty much immediately black out, just within a few moments. But if an aircraft is subjected to what we've been led to believe was a missile strike, a number of things could happen at that altitude. A strike from a missile, either an air-to-air missile from another aircraft or for a surface-to-air missile, which is again what we've been led to believe took place. When a missile like that strikes an aircraft at altitude, there's a couple of possibilities. Depending upon where the aircraft was struck, this aircraft could explode if it is hit in an area that has a fuel tank and the fuel is actually detonated immediately. There is likely to be a ball of fire at that altitude.
In the sky, a ball of fire in the sky.
Right, at 32,000 feet.
So there would be smoke. Would it be black, white? What color smoke might you expect?
Fuel burns black, sooty.
Black.
So
Okay.
at 32,000 feet, you'd see a huge ball of fire and black smoke.
Okay.
If the fuel tanks were hit with a missile or some other projectile that was able to ignite the fuel in the tanks.
Now, roughly, where are the clouds compared to at 32,000 feet? Would you be above the clouds or below or in the clouds?
That varies with the weather on that day.
Okay.
When an aircraft is struck somewhere other than near the fuel system, a couple of things happen. The first thing that happens when a projectile of any kind breaches the hull or the fuselage of an aircraft is immediate depressurization. And when that depressurization occurs, the structural integrity of the aircraft is compromised to the point where it begins to disintegrate immediately. The occupants of the aircraft, before very much of this takes place, are usually already blacked out. They are unconscious because of loss of oxygen.
That kind of makes me feel a little better. Something happens that I will not be conscious for the fall.
Now, one of the things that happens when an aircraft breaks up at altitude, bear in mind that this thing is an extremely heavy object moving through the air at 550, 560 miles an hour. This thing is really moving. And when the hull is breached, when the fuselage is compromised, the pressurization goes to zero and the aircraft starts to disintegrate and break up into literally hundreds and hundreds of big chunks.
What do you mean big? Big like this, or big like a size of a car?
It varies with the explosion and the structure of the aircraft, the speed that it's moving at. All of that is taken into consideration. And at first, the first thing that happens is you get a huge hole in the aircraft, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then these big chunks of airplanes start coming apart. Wings fall off.
Well, it's going
tails
500
fall
miles
off,
an hour.
The fuselage breaks up into big chunks. Yes.
Okay, so you would have miles and miles and miles of debris. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
If you have a depressurization and an aircraft disintegration at 32,000 feet, and you're traveling 560 miles an hour or 900 knots, by the time this aircraft wreckage makes it down to the ground, it's going to be scattered over literally miles in whatever the direction of flight was. It's going to be carried on the prevailing wind. It will be, as the aircraft, what's left of it, begins to fall to the ground, it will tumble and flutter and fall and fracture into even smaller pieces.
Oh.
So by the time the aircraft gets to the ground, the only things that are going to be of any significant size are going to be things like landing gear, engines, and the parts that are not going to be torn apart by turbulence in the air. When the aircraft begins to disintegrate, the fuel cells, the wings, which are basically fuel tanks that are sealed up to hold fuel, all of that is a part of the airframe, the aircraft structure. And when the wings come apart, the fuselage comes apart, the tail comes apart, so do the wings. And all of the fuel instantly is dumped out into the atmosphere, and it becomes immediately atomized into the ambient air. So
at roughly 32,000 feet, the fuel spreads out.
Within a matter of seconds, when an aircraft disintegrates at altitude, all of the fuel is dispersed. It's atomized into the air, and it never really reaches the ground in any volume that is what you might call a flammable mixture.
So you would not see an explosion on the ground, basically, when the pieces hit.
In most cases, if an aircraft is falling from that altitude, when it hits the ground, the fuel's already gone. So if there's an explosion of any kind, it may be something that's in the cargo hold. It may be something that it makes contact with on the ground that causes an explosion. But if the fuel is gone by the time the aircraft reaches the ground, it does not make any sense for there to be a huge ball of fire explosion, which is kind of what we've been led to believe if you look at the photographs that are posted on the internet of this supposed aircraft crash.
Well, what about the what-if scenarios? Because I was supposing, because I saw what they showed on the news, this ball of fire come up. First of all, I thought, why is it a ball instead of a line of smoke or whatever? So let's say the media is wrong. They're never wrong, are they? Let's say the media was wrong and the cabin was not pressurized, and they just magically hit it in such a way that both wings were intact and still filled with gasoline. Not gasoline. What do they put in there? Diesel?
It's
a special.
It's jet fuel.
Jet fuel.
Basically, it's kerosene.
Okay, let's see if the magic thing happened, and you got two wings coming down, and it started out 500 something miles an hour, or a little slower. What would happen to that wing full of fuel when it hits the ground? Are we going to have a ball that goes straight up in the air?
If you operate on the assumption that the aircraft was crippled rather than completely destroyed at 32,000 feet, and the pilot or the crew or autopilot, as the case may be, managed to get the aircraft down to a lower altitude,
okay,
and it maintained its structural integrity long enough to be a large chunk when it made an impact, then what you will see, if the fuel tanks were intact and they were still full of fuel, or they had a significant amount of fuel on board, what you're going to see is something similar to what took place in Vietnam, when fighter pilots drop napalm into the Vietnamese jungle. You'll see a long trail of fuel.
That's what I was expecting to see.
This aircraft was traveling a significant speed, and these things don't just drop straight down. They're not yard darts. These things are traveling at extremely high rates of speed, and when they hit the ground, they leave a debris trail miles long. And you can talk to aircraft investigators, and they will tell you that this is pretty much the case for even smaller aircraft. When they crash, they don't just point down into the dirt and leave a small wreckage site.
It's not like a meteor hitting the ground.
Debris is strewn over. In most cases, when you have a low-level accident, it's strewn over acres of territory. And in the case of a commercial airliner that's come down from altitude, sometimes it's literally miles. And if you talk to the investigators that have worked accidents in jungles and on hills and in the mountains, this stuff is scattered for such lengths that they quite often don't recover everything. Don't recover all of the people on board. They don't recover all of the cargo. They don't recover all the luggage. They don't even recover all of the aircraft parts. So I guess the information that we are being fed on the internet and from the mainstream media about this aircraft coming down from 32,000 feet and arriving at the ground where you see just a smoke ball and a flame doesn't make any sense to me. I'm having a hard time balancing that with what I know about science and aviation and the laws of physics. We
had the space shuttle exploded right over our house basically a few years ago. It was very, very loud, and what the debris field on it was, well, it was going a lot faster than a commercial airline, but it went over, I think, hundreds of miles. So yeah, this is kind of like a condensed area. As far as the crash site investigation goes, you know a lot about access and control. Now, my question, I'm sure everybody else has this question too. Okay, this is in another country. We do things differently in the United States as far as the airline system goes than in other countries. Is that true or not true? Because what I'm hearing, and if you don't want to hear this, close your ears, but I've got reporters saying, I'm having to step over dead bodies. Oh, look, I'm inside the fuselage, and look up here, etc. You have reporters claiming that they're going through all of this field of debris and trying to step over, I won't be graphic, but stuff that's not solid bodies, and having to step through and around all of this. What do you think about all of that from what you know as far as the worldwide way of how these things are conducted?
Well, to begin with, aviation is an American original. It started here and spread out to the rest of the world. And that's the reason that most of the world's aircraft for so many years have come from this country. And that's the reason that English is the primary language in all international airports.
I'm learning a lot today. This is cool.
And this is not much different. The aviation world, as it operates on a normal routine basis, it's not much different from the way that aviation works when they investigate crashes.
Like worldwide, not just in this country.
It doesn't matter where an aircraft crashes, the control of the crash site is paramount. And it doesn't matter.
Because it's a crime scene, right?
It is a potential crime scene, and it's treated as a crime scene until it's deemed otherwise by the crash scene investigators. And it doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or in the UK or Ecuador or China, an air crash is an air crash, and it's treated the same way worldwide. The government of the territory involved in this crash will seize immediate control of the crash site, and they will absolutely not let anybody in until the crash investigation team has had a chance to do their jobs and to remove the wreckage and clean up any evidence and take measurements, photographs, and drawings. They absolutely do not let stray people into a crash site beyond the emergency response efforts of whatever local people happen to be out there on the site at the time.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Don't they take every single piece of the aircraft, take it off to another location, piece it all back together, piece whatever they have left of the aircraft to determine what actually did happen to the aircraft?
In most cases, yes. They have crashing investigation teams made up of people who do the, for lack of a better term, the dirty work. They pick up everything, they catalog everything, they make drawings and photographs. It's all carefully removed, taken to a certain location. Sometimes it may be a sports arena, an aircraft hangar.
Yeah, I've seen like warehouse and aircraft hangars. I've seen some of those.
Whatever they can gather from the crash site is reconstructed for the purposes of analyzing what was left of the aircraft to try and determine a cause.
So if reporters and people who want to keep souvenirs and all that, it wouldn't make sense that you would just let people walk through because they like to put things in their pocket and say, I was there.
Absolutely not. Evidence is evidence, and the authorities, wherever they happen to be, absolutely prohibit people removing evidence from a crash scene. That's just not done. And the fact that the media is reporting that reporters are walking through a crash site basically unescorted is indicative to me that they are there because somebody wants them there. Either a government or some other controlling authority is probably not only allowing them access to this site, but encouraging them to go to this site and have a field day and shoot photos and video and report on whatever it is they're seeing. If this is in fact what we're really seeing. We don't really know. I'm not there. I can't tell you. But common sense and what I know about the aircraft industry in general is contradictory to what we're being fed from the mainstream media and even some of the stuff that you see on the alternative media on the internet. That said, this world is in political turmoil. It has been for decades. This has all the earmarks of another some kind of a political move. Don't know by who or for what reason, but it doesn't pass the sniff test. This whole thing is questionable.
I'm smelling something.
This whole event is questionable. Much like the last Malaysian airliner, we still don't know where it is. Questionable. There's a lot of things that don't make sense about that. There's a lot of things that don't make sense about this. And I would expect that we'll see others in the future
I think we're going to see more airplanes
that have questionable.
We're going to see a lot of that. That's why we wanted to educate you guys. And this is the guy who knows this information. I don't. And I wanted, before they start to stage a lot of other airplane disasters, I want you guys to be educated on what actually happens to airplanes. So when you watch the media, you'll go, wait a minute, that's not how it's supposed to be. Why have other pilots, Chuck, not come out and said what you're saying? Why are they not doing that?
Pilots who fly for a living would probably be the most qualified candidates to talk about this. And for a lot of reasons, these folks don't express their personal opinions, much for the same reasons they don't express their opinions about UFOs. And a lot of them have opinions about UFOs. Oh,
and not to name any names, but I do know a commercial pilot. I'm not going to say the airlines he flies for, but he did talk about he saw something on the level of a UFO that went into water, then came back up out of the water and flew away. And I said, did you report that? And he said, oh, no. that they would have basically treated it like he had a psychiatric illness or something, and he probably would have lost his license. So it's kind of like, if you see UFOs, you don't talk. I know that from talking to this unnamed person.
Now, active pilots are probably less likely to make public statements.
Yeah, he's active.
Regarding incidents like this. There are some pilots who are no longer flying, or they're no longer flying for the airlines. You can probably find them on blogs on the internet, and there's all sorts of opinions out there.
They're probably drawing retirement, so they probably don't want to say anything if they're drawing retirement.
There's a lot of people out there with websites who are more than happy to give you their opinion, and a lot of it is similar to what we're talking about, that things don't make sense. And that as a viewing member of the public, you probably should be cautious about what you see from the media regarding things like this. Don't take everything at face value. Do some research. Talk to some people that know some things. And look at everything with a little bit of a question mark in your head. Don't just blindly follow the media down that road, because they will take you down the dark road.
And what the media does, and this is from me, not from Chuck. This is just kind of a suggestion from me. Something that helped me. I used to watch mainstream media, and I would get caught up in the emotions. And once I got caught up in the emotions, logic took a sidestep. And I would believe anything they told me because it was just awful. What Chuck and I do as far as news goes, we tend to do a lot of reading. We read the news. And when you read the news compared to watching a broadcast, you don't get emotional about it. And you're able to read something and go, that doesn't sound right. Let me do some research. But when you're watching, dead bodies all over the ground, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a teddy bear. Oh my gosh. When you're like that, and they're telling you, okay, this explosion from the ground, but it was shot at 32,000 feet, you're going to believe that because you're seeing a teddy bear. And you're going, oh my gosh, that could be my child. So that's my unsolicited advice to you on how to start researching. Do you know of, are there sources out there? What do you think are, what do you call not credible sources? I can tell you some, NBC, ABC, Fox.
I tend to look at the mainstream media with a jaundiced point of view. I look at a variety of different news sources, alternative media. It does not hurt to look at the mainstream media to see what they're broadcasting. That way you'll have a balance. You'll be able to...
And then go research what they say.
Right. And you can make your own educated decisions about what you've read or seen here and there. Because everything that you'll see out in the media, a lot of it is designed to play on emotions. And if...
it's a drama. It's a movie. And we've got the alternative media out there also. And what we're finding out is a lot of the alternative media that gets really big and starts to speak out about this, you start to do research into it, and they're basically bought and paid for by our government. And they're putting out alternative media information. So you have to be careful with alternative media also, because the government knows that, hey, they're not watching mainstream media anymore. They've switched over to the alternative. So we're going to take the biggest alternative media people, and we're going to get them back on our side. But the people are going to think they're on their side. Have you seen some sources that you've looked at over the years, and suddenly you go, wait a minute, it looks like they're on the other side now. What's going on?
Right. We've noticed that a lot, that you start to believe one source, and then all of a sudden this source becomes maybe not so credible anymore, and you twist around and you start looking for other sources that you think are viable and are maybe not feeding you misinformation. It is an effort. It's truly an effort to find what you might consider credible information out there. There are so many sources, and there are so many users out there broadcasting all kinds of information for all kinds of purposes, political and corporate. It's pretty widespread out there, so you have to be careful what you decide to believe.
And then you've got, whether it's mainstream or another alternative source. 25 people died. Well, okay, that's great. And then you look up other news sources to see, are other sources reporting on the same thing? And then on top of it, go a step further and go research and go find the death certificates of these people. And a lot of what we're finding, we're doing a lot of searching. And I'm not going to name any because we're not even focusing on that on this broadcast. But there have been a lot of instances within the last year to a year and a half where there have been mass casualties, if you will, multiple people that have been killed, and we cannot find death certificates for these people at all. So question. Even if you feel like you have found a good alternative media source or a good media source, keep questioning that one, because they will gain your trust and then they'll start lying to you. And you have to have your head on straight to know when they start lying to you. So is there anything else you wanted to add that we didn't cover about airplanes or anything?
Can't think of anything.
Pretty much covered it. So, okay, I guess in a nutshell, what is your conclusion on this airplane thing?
Well, on this one, at this point, I'm afraid I'm going to have to call bullshit. I don't believe what I'm seeing. I don't believe what I'm reading. There's too many markers that don't add up. The science doesn't match the story, and so I'm disinclined to believe what I've read and what I've seen on almost everything out there on this event. And as in most cases, more information will come out, and some information will change, and the stories will be skewed. So watch it and digest it and analyze it and make up your own mind. Do your research and pay attention.
Yeah, oh, that's good advice. Absolutely good advice. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this. I wanted to get some information to you, educate you before you go and you look at mainstream media or any of the other media that you do need to question this. So in the comments, if you've got any questions for Chuck, I don't know if he's going to have time. He's a very busy person, but he might be able to answer those, or we might have him on a second time to answer some questions if you do have any. If you have any ideas of what you think is really going on, please put that in the comments also and get some discussions going down there. And please, as always, do not argue in the comments. We just want to all express our opinions and our feelings. So let's try and do that without arguing, and let's try to learn from each other instead of start a fight in the comments. So thank you guys for joining us, and I want to give a big thank you to my family for supporting me and watching this live. And as always, guys, we will see you on the next video. Bye.